Here we are. So, John, I think you are to you live from the same room, and we're going to have to be working out these echo issues because his mic is picking up me at the same time. So as we interview our guests, we're going to be switching on and off of mute. But it's a special treat to actually be in the same room with you, Mr. John Kao. And this is not a virtual background, as our next or first guest had inquired. So why don't we just dive right into it and get rid of the echo here, and I'll just set up the stage, John, and I'll welcome you to come off of mute here in a second. Welcome to Intersections. John, you might want to hit the mute button.
You know, we said that given everything,
you're still on mute.
Given the fact that we are now in a digital era, we felt that we wanted to be counterintuitive and go to an analog format in the sense of being physically together, physically in the space. We're in the studio environment. I've always had this fantasy of living in a studio, and so this notion that we are collaborating, we are in an environment that is conducive to production, to music creation. We now have the Intersection Studio. We have a headquarters in San Francisco, a physical footprint where actual three-dimensional things, four-dimensional things, if you like, happen. Brian, thank you so much. It's great to jam with you also in person as well as virtually. We've been totally virtual since the inception, since the pre-planning of this show. Brian's my missing half, my twin in innovation. We have overlapping networks, we have overlapping perspectives and areas of expertise. He's been a thought leader in the digital domain since before digital was fashionable and has followed waves of progress in terms of digital marketing, digital innovation, and more. He's a thought leader par excellence, a publisher in multiple media, best-selling author, keynote speaker, and even has a day job, which is global evangelist for innovation for Salesforce. So here we are, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Kao. Now I want to bring up our first guest. It's actually someone who's been a longtime friend and also neighbor, live down the street from each other, Mr. Guy Kawasaki. So we don't have a producer today, so I'm doing everything myself. Welcome, Guy. Welcome.
It's very obvious that you don't have a producer today and you're doing everything by yourself. Well, let me just point that out.
Oh, you know, I love how you always are you pussyfooting around certain things and always holding back, guys. So with that said, I'm going to just.
That's a good thing I can read lips.
Oh man, I'm going to give you your formal introduction. You are the chief evangelist at Canva. You're also the creator of Guy Kawasaki's Remarkable People podcast. You're an executive fellow at the Haas School of Business, UC Berkeley. You're an adjunct professor at the University of New South Wales. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
You were chief evangelist of Apple and a trustee of the Wikimedia Foundation. And I think the world watched your rise to fame, not only as the chief evangelist of Apple, but also being the author of some very transformative books. I've been personally an audience member of many of your keynotes around the world. Kawasaki has a BA from Stanford University, an MBA from UCLA, and an honorary doctorate from Babson College. So I actually have another 45 minutes of things to read about you, but maybe we should just jump right in. And so, Guy, what are you working on these days?
Well, right now, I'm primarily the chief evangelist of Canva, which is an online graphics design service out of Sydney, Australia. And I'm working on my podcast, Remarkable People. And I surf a lot. So not in that order is what I prioritize, however.
Yeah, I do want to ask you about surfing. I just realized the last time I saw you was in the lounge at South by Southwest 2019.
Yeah.
A year before the pandemic. And I think we're just launching your podcast shortly around that time. It's gone on to have some incredible people on the show. For someone who's always asked, what do I need to do? What do I need to think about differently? What have you learned from some of the most amazing people you've had on your show?
Well, I truly have had remarkable people, from Jane Goodall, Steve Wozniak, Steve Wolfram, Steven Pinker, Christy Yamaguchi, Andrew Yang. So there are some common themes. And one common theme is that people are dealing with the imposter syndrome. Even these remarkable people deal with the imposter syndrome. And so the feeling that, do they deserve this honor? Do they deserve this kind of position? Do they deserve this reward? So that's one thing. Second common thread is many people believe that in order to succeed, they had to fake it until they made it. And that is a very valuable lesson, because quite frankly, most of us are faking it until we make it. And we all think we're the only people who are faking it. Basically everybody's faking it. So that's another lesson I learned. And another lesson I learned is that over and over, people have stated about how their mother fostered their independence, their strength, their courage, and their daring. Not one person has said, my father was a huge influence that helped me in my, literally, not one person. Everybody said mother. Yeah. You're muted.
I say, sorry, Dad. Because Guy's right. Actually, I would have to say the same thing. But that also kind of makes me think about, as a father myself, with two little ones, what I could do differently to maybe be part of the answer, not the only answer. You've been on the forefront of innovation. I remember back in the days when you were also an active venture capitalist before the rise of Web 2.0, and actively advising not just big companies but also startups. And here we are in Silicon Valley 20 years later. What do you think the Valley itself needs to learn, especially coming out of this post-pandemic economy? All of this, the sky is falling. People are leaving Silicon Valley, moving all over the place. What could we do to be stronger and better, and then coming out of this whole thing?
Well, for one thing, I think that the lack of diversity in founders and people who are funded is pathetic. I think the gating item in any successful startup is people and their idea. And so the thought that whether it's conscious or unconscious, that only or mostly men can be founders and CEOs is just flawed. I mean, like, why would you eliminate half the market by unconsciously or consciously always funding men? It makes no sense to me whatsoever. So that's one thing. And I think a lot of companies are simply echo chambers that people tend to hire people who are similar to them. So guess what? If you're a male Ivy League millennial with an MBA, guess who you tend to hire? And so that leads to companies that are, not built on the strongest foundation that they could be.
I think that's a point that we're all having to learn, not just from a business standpoint, but just from a societal standpoint.
Mhm.
That the balance has been off, and I don't know. Politics has really cast a light on this conversation, in probably not the most positive and productive way. But I do feel like this is an opportunity to look beyond just how we found companies, but also how we staff companies, how we form C-suites, how we think about boards.
I'll tell you a great story. So a couple of weeks ago, I had Colin Breyer on my podcast, and he used to be the chief of staff of Jeff Bezos. And he was telling stories about Amazon and how Amazon works. Amazon has a very rigid, disciplined, organized recruiting process where, it's not kind of you go in the back of the company, say, okay, so who's free to interview this candidate? I mean, there are like 9 or 10 people, and they are each given a specific topic, a specific kind of quality to examine the candidate for. So it's not this kind of touchy-feely, tell me about your strengths and weaknesses, and tell me about an instance where you had to rise above it, and that kind of bullshit. And so he told a story that once there was a department that had extreme lack of gender diversity. And so the way recruiting works at Amazon is they get your cover letter and your resume. Somebody makes a decision, call or no call. So the first touch is a phone call. And so what this department decided to do, which I think is very clever, they decided that every female candidate would get the first call. So you would not be eliminated prior to the first call, which means that the pool of women became much deeper because every woman got to the first step. And that really helped them diversify in terms of gender. And that's a very simple thing. And I think that is a brilliant insight. Like if you increase the pool, guess what? You'll probably discover there's a lot of great people in that pool.
That is a great story. That I think if it's one thing that we could take away too is also thinking, beyond the numbers and being more open-minded for what are the desired outcomes that we want to see with that role. So, for example, what is it that we can do differently than just checking a box, right? And that goes across the board for not just diversity and inclusion, but also for possibility. You know what? I think one of the things that we could be greater at as well is looking for people who challenge the sort of conventions and beliefs that create today's culture in order to make everybody a better version of themselves. I don't know what algorithm is going to help identify that, but just something as simple as the story that you shared of trying something that from a human process level that's just a game changer. And I think there's a lot to learn from that. I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, John, and I'll go on mute so my mic doesn't pick him up. And John, over to you.
So, Guy, it's a pleasure to see you again.
Thank you.
You've been around in the Bay Area, the Valley, since the time practically it was fruit trees as opposed to computer chips.
We've been around as long as electricity.
Yeah. So people have been predicting the decline of Silicon Valley in cyclical ways for the last few decades,
Right.
recessions and so forth and so on. Now we have a situation where it's fashionable to move to Austin. People are leaving the Bay Area. There's kind of a pall of pessimism, I guess, about the future of the area. What is your prediction? Do you think that because, for instance, real estate prices have gone down in the South of Market Street area and so forth and so on, that there'll be a roaring back of entrepreneurs looking to locate here because of the advantages of being in the place with the secret sauce?
Okay.
Or do you think the bloom has gone off of Florence?
Okay, so I have very strong feelings about this. First of all, I think that a few examples doesn't necessarily mean a trend. And even if it was a trend, it's not clear that it's a long-term trend. So I think the concept of Silicon Valley is losing all its great innovation, people are all going to Austin or Miami, is total bullshit. Because let's take an extreme example. If you read that HPE or Oracle has moved their headquarters to Austin or Miami or wherever, I don't think you should necessarily conclude, there goes tech, there goes entrepreneurship, there goes innovation. Because let's face it, at the life stage of an HPE or an Oracle, they're not exactly at the forefront of innovation and entrepreneurship anymore. When you're an Oracle, you're looking for MBAs, you're looking for financial analysts, you're looking for risk analysis, you're looking for portfolio analysis, you're looking for people who work for Accenture and Goldman Sachs and all that. You're not looking for two people who just graduated from Stanford with a computer science degree. Those people are not going to go to Oracle anyway. So if you think that all the smart people left Silicon Valley when Oracle moved, you're delusional. So now, in a post-pandemic world, and I mean after the pandemic, not after we're in the pandemic, let's revisit how many high-tech startups started. And it was at Stanford, two classmates in the computer science department, right? So they're, Jerry and David, Sergey and Larry, they're in the computer science department of Stanford. They're hanging out. They're getting drunk on the weekends. They see each other constantly. They decide one day, let's start a company. We'll create a search engine based on inbound links with our professor at Stanford. So that's the scenario that created really the HPs, ironically, Yahoo, Apple. I mean, you just go down the line, right? All these great startups. So now, my question to these people who think that innovation and entrepreneurship is leaving Silicon Valley. So let's fast forward. Now, next year, Stanford is back in session in real life, face-to-face, analog. Larry and Sergey, the next Larry and Sergey, are now taking comp sci together again. And they're having these discussions about starting a company. Explain to me how Larry and Sergey, who are living off campus in Mountain View, as part of their discussion, they're saying, you know what, we ought to start this new company. And the first thing we got to do is we have to move to Miami and Austin. That is an utterly ridiculous thought, because Larry and Sergey, working in their spare bedroom in Mountain View, they're not thinking about relocation. They're not thinking about, let's take the tiny amount of money we have and let's fly to Austin and let's fly to Miami and start all over there. They're thinking, how can we steal stuff from Stanford? We have a buddy at Google and he can give us a password and we can host our stuff at, Google, or my friend works for AWS and we can they're not thinking about relocating two guys in a garage. So maybe I'm an outlier, but I think it's bullshit that, it's because they went to school together at Stanford or Cal, pick a place. And so that's how the interaction started for two people starting a tech company, not by, let's relocate to Austin because the barbecue is better there and the cost of living is better there. And we like to watch bats fly under the bridge at 6 p.m.
We're making this transition via the pandemic to more digital ways of interacting with one another. And
true.
I guess the question is, does the serendipity of being proximate to people, walking up and down 2nd Street or 3rd Street and getting a coffee in South Park, is that still going to matter as much coming out of the pandemic? Is something, let's say, going to have changed about the way, the next Larry and Sergey meet with the next, PR person with the next, et cetera? Well,
I think the next Larry and Sergey, again, post-pandemic, the next Larry and Sergey are still going to meet in comp sci, 235 at Stanford. And now I don't mean to say the whole world is Stanford bound, but it could be, Caltech. It could be Carnegie Mellon. It could be, but I think it's the post-pandemic, it's physically young people meeting each other, coming up with crazy ideas. And I'm telling you, unless I'm totally nuts, one part of their discussion is not going to be, let's compare the cost of living of Silicon Valley versus Austin. And so let's the two of us move to Austin right now as step one in starting this company. There's no freaking way. So now the best of both worlds is that Larry and Sergey meet at Stanford. They're working in Mountain View. They're starting a company and they say, you know what? Remember in the pandemic when it didn't matter where you are? So now we don't just have to hire people from Stanford. We can hire people from Ukraine. We can hire people from Czechoslovakia to do our programming. So you get the benefit of recruiting from anywhere in the world virtually. But the two guys, the two gals, the guy and the gal who started in the garage or the dorm or the spare bedroom, they still started physically in the same place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think that as soon as it's safe to emerge from our cocoons of viral protection, the social interaction, the informality, the serendipity, the sort of seeking out of culture, all of that stuff is going to stir the pot, and things will become very active again. The other question I wanted to ask you, in terms of your perspective of decades now and how things work in the Bay Area, is there anything that's different about the innovation or entrepreneurship process today as opposed to 20 years ago? If so, what is it? I mean, I understand that the basics of zeal and openness to wacky ideas and so forth and so on, that's going to be a constant. But is there anything that's changed about the actual process of innovation and entrepreneurship?
Well, I think that the social media is a humongous factor there, where back when I was starting a software company in the 80s and 90s, 1980 and 90, not 1880 and 90. So back then, your marketing was, we have to go to Comdex, right? Or we have to go to CES. And every Thursday, Walt Mossberg writes a tech article. And so the key is to get into Walt Mossberg's tech article in the Wall Street Journal. And a one-page ad in the Wall Street Journal costs $75,000, and that's what we have to do. And I think social media has changed all of that. That it used to be, in my humble opinion, that the top of the pyramid, the Walt Mossbergs, the Wall Street Journals, Washington Post, New York Times, they determine the winners and the losers. If the New York Times or Wall Street Journal said to use Lotus 123, Lotus 123 was made. I think the world is inverted now. And so it's Trixie and Biff. And if Trixie and Biff start using Clubhouse and more Trixies and Biff start using Clubhouse, I don't think that the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or the Washington Post or Verve or TechCrunch or any of these things pick the winners. I think they follow the winners. So when Clubhouse takes off, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Verve, TechCrunch, they have to write about Clubhouse, because Clubhouse is a phenomenon. They didn't pick Clubhouse and they didn't make Clubhouse the winner. That changes everything, I think, in entrepreneurship.
So it sounds like you're saying that it's a democratization. They're not the traditional gatekeepers anymore. I mean, the new stuff can take off from anywhere as long as the polity, all of us kind of begin to latch onto it.
I think so. And, so this has enormous ramifications on the marketing of a startup, because the marketing of a startup is not to suck up to the Wall Street Journal. The marketing of a startup is to get Trixie and Biff to use your product. And if you get enough Trixies and Biff, guess what? The Wall Street Journal has to cover you.
So, Brian, back over to you, I think.
Guy, this is the real live example of how you run a show without a producer. Look at us go.
Yeah, not the echo.
In fact, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was, say, something like a Clubhouse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Left field, suddenly overnight buzz, the kind of the same way that we would see at South by Southwest, right? With
Twitter, right?
Yeah, with Twitter or
right.
Just whatever that latest hot startup was, and there was an event, and there was like this serendipity around it with the right people, the right places, and suddenly that was the next trend. And now you had that happen on its own. I mean, the pandemic, I'm sure, was an accelerant, but what's that lightning in the bottle? And what are entrepreneurs everywhere scratching their heads thinking about? Hey, how could we repeat this success?
Well, shit, Brian, if we knew that, well, we sure as hell would not explain it on a podcast. We would keep it secret, right? I think the way Silicon Valley works is you throw a lot of shit up against the wall, some of it sticks, and you go up to the wall and you paint the bullseye around it. You say, I hit the bullseye. So, I mean, right now, Mark Andreessen is saying, yeah, I knew that Clubhouse would be successful. Okay. And, so, who funded pets.com? I mean, the same VCs who knew everything else would be successful. So I don't know, other than with hindsight, how you can say who the winners are and how to predict and how to actually produce winners. If you to go into a historical example, if you had said to me, okay, so we're going to create this platform where people can send out 140 character text messages to anybody who happens to be on the system, and people are going to send out updates like the line at Starbucks is long, or I don't feel well today. And we're going to call this thing Twitter, and people are going to tweet all about this, and eventually the president of the United States is going to use this to make policy. We would tell them, you're on cocaine, you're a crack. Like, what's wrong with you? Have you not heard of text messages, email, IRC? I mean, there's like 16 ways to already send out text messages, and you're going to invent another one so that people can tell people that the line at Starbucks is long? Why would you invest in Twitter? I rest my case. I mean, who the hell would have predicted that, right?
Right. No, I mean, I think that's a really important point. The other part that I don't know that we understand enough are the cultural dynamics of what is happening, right? Because I think what we could look at is messaging services and platforms were already big in Asia, and that they had evolved beyond text. And I think that's something to look at with Clubhouse. We missed a lot of things that were happening in the real world. We were when the company first launched, though, it was only about 3-4 months into lockdowns. We didn't know how long this was going to last. But I think the common theme that I've been seeing, at least in the last 10, 15 years of disruptive innovation, has been a human dynamic and a seismic shift in how humans communicate, and then how we make that world a smaller place with these shared interests, and not just an interest graph, but like these real-time dynamic conversations of where the people feel like they're part of a real-time community across these platforms all around the world. I don't know. There's something to analyze there, and I don't know. So maybe we'll have to continue this conversation, Guy, when we have a producer back.
Well, one more thing about Twitter and Clubhouse is the irony now is that, does Twitter with spaces kill Clubhouse, or does Clubhouse kill Twitter? That's going to be interesting. So, because, I could make the case that Twitter Space, I have, 1.5 million followers. Of course, probably half of them are dead and the other half are Russian bots. But, so I have 1.5 million followers on Twitter, and I have, 35,000 on Clubhouse. One would think that my Twitter space would be much more valuable and powerful than my Clubhouse space, but that is to be determined. I don't know. So for me, Clubhouse, my activity there is defensive. I'm there in case it takes off, just like I joined Ello and Periscope and Meerkat, just in case. And, so far I'm 0 for 3 there. So who knows, right?
Hey, but those did teach us, right? They said I think those platforms failed to capitalize on was that human dynamic, right? I'll just make a prediction here, or not a prediction, just an observation.
Okay.
I think Twitter Spaces is going to compete against Twitter itself, and I think it's going to be a form of cannibalism, because when you're on the Twitter platform, you're sort of in this mindset of sort of like micro engagement, and you go to Clubhouse with the mindset of dedicating a big swath of your time. I'm pretty sure anybody who's been on Clubhouse will say, yeah, I went on there, and 4 hours later, I emerged from all of these things.
But we were saying that about Facebook and Instagram too.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, and then ephemeral conversation started with Snapchat. I don't know, man. Maybe, Guy, the future is this.
Yeah. Remarkable tablet. That's right, baby.
Oh, man. All right. Guy, we're going to have to bring you back when we have a much more polished format and everything's working, because I have actually a bunch of more questions that I want to ask you. And we'll also have to take this conversation to Clubhouse as well.
And I'm going surfing right now. Okay.
Oh, man. Where are you going surfing?
Santa Cruz. I'm going.
Jealous.
All right. Thank
you for joining.
An honor and a pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much.
Always good to see you. Oh, man. Wow. He is just a burst of amazing energy. And we have this microphone thing. It's actually leading to great ideas, John. I'll share with you after the show. so that we have. We're going to raise our game here. Our next guest is with us, but before we bring her on, I do want to say that I understand there were some technical challenges at the beginning of the show, that you didn't catch the first 3 minutes of audio. So please do share with us where you're tuning in from. Do ask us your questions. We want to hear from you. We're always learning. If you have any recommendations of guests or ideas, just please share with us. We'll feature them in the stream. They'll always live in the comments. And then we might bring some of those ideas to future shows. Now, with that said, I'm going to turn it over to John. Go on mute so that he can introduce our next guest.
So I like to say to Brian that this is a new medium, like the dawn of film or the dawn of television, and the pieces don't necessarily all fit together, which makes it kind of exciting and edgy in a way. And if you imagine that we're here sitting at my kitchen counter and we are, especially Brian, occupying simultaneously the roles of technology backbone person, producer, camera person, lighting expert, guest wrangler, interviewer, and on-screen talent simultaneously, that will tell you a little bit about why this is a adrenaline-fueled activity. In any event, I'm really excited to be introducing our next guest for a variety of reasons. Deborah Quazzo is currently a managing partner at GSV Ventures, which I understand just recently raised another fund, so congratulations for that. The focus of GSV Ventures is education, workforce development, certainly topics of the day, month, year, and decade. She's also a co-founder of the ASU GSV conference, the Education Summit, which has become an industry gold standard for getting people together to talk about the future of education and workforce development. And I guess I can reveal here on camera that Deborah and I have a relationship that goes back a number of years, because we met at Harvard Business School when I was standing up in front of the class, and she was misfortunate to be sitting in one of the probably not the sky deck, but one of the seats in
no, second row.
Second row. Okay, well I would have guessed something like that. You know, sky deck, just for those of you that don't know, is where people go when they want low visibility and to avoid being cold called. And if you're like me and kind of counterphobic, you'll sit in the front row, recognizing that the instructor's gaze goes over your head and into the second row where the high achievers are. And obviously we have one here on the show.
Too much testosterone in the sky deck.
Well, that's true. That's true. Got to go somewhere. It goes into sky deck use, from what I'm given to understand. Anyway, it's great to see you. Congratulations on the latest developments. You know, as someone who gets to see the cresting wave of innovation in workforce development and the whole technology meets education agenda, I wonder, first of all, if you could share with us what you consider to be the hotspots, maybe 2 or 3 of the most exciting emerging agendas in this rapidly evolving field, and then we can dig down into some of the specifics.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of hotspots. So I think you got to sort of slice it by sort of product areas versus geographies. So if you look at what happened in 2020, which was, you know, despite the tragedy of the last 12 months that we've lived through, you know, we've done BC to AD, before Corona, after disease, the dawn of the age of digital learning. It was transformative for digital learning companies that had scaled, like Coursera and others, were already on a great track prior to the pandemic, and obviously the pandemic accelerated their growth by a number of years. We think the category should be reach $1 trillion from sort of 200 billion today by 2027. So just rapid expansion all over. If we look at hotspots, over the last 12 months, we've probably spent more hours on Zoom. So my days never end. They start early in the morning and late at night, in India. So I think that what's happening in India is interesting. If you look at growth and venture capital raised in edtech, in 2020, China continued to dominate by a mile. But India was second and ahead of the U.S. market in terms of capital raising. There's one company, Baidu, which is an amazing India-based company, but that accounted for quite a bit of that capital. But still, I think it's quite a material fact that India has moved so into the forefront, and it's really around all layers. But the consumer sector, the rising middle class, the fact that 100% of college graduates in India are engineers, so the engineering supply, which I think people don't focus on all the time. And it's when you can go into a country of that size and 100% of college grads are engineers, wow, does that change your talent dynamics? And their care for education. I mean, what you see is that it doesn't matter how poor you are in India, and the poverty, actually GDP per capita remains just stunningly low, it's 2,000 or something. You are spending every dollar you've got educating your kids. And so you see in India a case where tutors are revered and worshipped, and they're stars. They're like Hollywood, and their posters are everywhere. And so I think you'd sort of take this combination of rising middle class, reverence for the importance of education to achieve life mobility, and this incredible talent pool of engineers. It really combines to create. So there are multiple hotspots in India, I would say. We're also seeing hotspots around community and cohort-based learning, and there obviously been lots of great tech companies built around community. We haven't really seen that, historically in education. I think we're going to see more and more community-based learning plays, and the importance of cohorts and community to creating engagement, completion, success. Again, life mobility, whether that's career mobility or you're still in the academic system. So we're seeing a lot of Shopify models. We're completing one investment in India, a Shopify model for tutors, and we've just completed a seed investment out of Canada in a Shopify model for adult creators. And then and actually the creator movement, of course, has exploded in learning the way it's exploded in the rest of the world, and just sort of the leveraging of talent into teaching others. Is another sort of area of hotspot. So we're pretty excited. I also think AI and the application of AI and NLP and in those emerging technologies was slow to get to education. I think now it's just sort of hitting its stride, and we're I think probably barely in the first inning of companies with sort of really interesting plays around what we call accelerated learning.
So speaking of AI, one of the holy grails out there seems to be the stitching together of the education system and the employment system, where credentialing enables the definition of learning pathways, which can lead to employers making offers into a market space and people with credentials participating in that market space. There's been some work at the executive branch of government level on trying to chart out what the policies are for that, and a number of companies are working on bits and pieces of that. First of all, what do you think of that? And then secondly, how far off do you think it is, if it is kind of an inevitability?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, it has to be, right? I mean, because, if you forget that only 30% of U.S. adults have a college degree, right? And the relevance of a college degree, I mean, seriously, is it really relevant that I graduated from Princeton in 1982? Can't possibly be relevant. Anyway, so the need to create lifelong career relevance and skill relevance, I think, is undisputed at this point, and relative to rapidly changing jobs. So I do think the stitching together of it's not even the stitching together. I think it's actually the blending. So we're seeing blending happen between higher ed and high school. So whether so really, what is high school? Why don't kids? We're seeing efforts to really push college learning down into the high school level, vice versa. We're seeing finally universities being really responsive to the job market, right? Because for it to be any other way is insane. And then you've got to tackle the 70% of folks who are not going through the university system. So you've got to stitch together education, whether it's a high school degree, a 2-year community college degree, or a 4-year degree, or someone who just needs to go back and get reskilled or upskilled through the certificate. So I just think that the fact that we went from a place, I'll get the wrong stats, but when whatever 80% of our population was farming and you didn't need credentials, now we really have moved to the complete opposite end, where nearly 100% of the workforce has got to have some form of credential to keep moving economically, and that does not need to be a 4-year degree. So that there has to be a blending and stitching together of these systems. And you're right, lots of people working on it. Arizona State's working on it with a bunch of Salesforce and Amazon and others. And it's pretty exciting actually. That we've had a theme that my partner Michael Moe developed many years ago. Knowledge is a currency. Knowledge has got to get liquid. We've got to have liquidity. It can't be sort of stuck in this stupid thing in your office wall. So yeah, we're pretty excited. Obviously, lots of blockchain. I haven't seen anything that is investable yet, but and maybe I don't know if that will be, but lots of applications for blockchain and things like that in it as well.
Yeah, it seems especially ironic that in executive education, which is practiced by companies, there's no way to transfer your learning from one company to another. I mean, we have, the legacy is just a network of walled gardens where, as you say, there is no liquidity, and the skills that are required not only don't flow, but can't really be demonstrated to.
They can't. They don't port. They aren't portable.
They don't port, exactly. So how far up do you think this vision is, where you'll have these increasingly algorithmically driven market spaces where you can kind of throw your hat in the ring and stuff will start happening to you and offers will start flying back and forth?
I think it's 5 years. I mean, I think it's this next leg of ed tech. I think if you can see what Salesforce is doing at ASU, for example, which I only know enough to be dangerous, but that's what they're doing. They're trying to be able to go in and pull out the students out of that massive ASU, 100,000 plus 75,000 live, and then actually probably 250,000 students, including online and offline, and to be able to go in and pluck out the students who have actually gone in and got the Salesforce credential combined with their higher ed credential. So I think that we're going to have, it's such and no one's, and this is out of my, but no one's really perfected talent selection, right? I mean, there've been lots of whacks at, AI driven and so perhaps a better way to do it is to actually just create this liquidity between companies and credentials and the owners of those credentials so that the matching can be much, done with much more precision. On a personal, on an individual level. So I think it's very doable. I think that, there's a company we're actually an investor in called Degreed the whole idea of Degreed is they sell into the enterprise. They create a personalized learning pathway and a personal sort of credential skills resume. And you do port it. When you leave XYZ company, that Degreed sort of portfolio travels with you wherever you go next. So that's only a slice of the market, but I think you're and companies have also gotten over the idea that Reid Hoffman said it years ago, but the idea that they have to protect they're protecting they're totally over. In fact, companies like Starbucks are actively educating their employees with the anticipation they'll be working someplace else down the road. So I think one of the cooler things we've seen is actually companies realizing that they are in fact the fourth education system, wouldn't call it a school, but and they have to be for really two reasons. One is job obsolescence, and the second is the failure of downstream systems. So if you look at Walmart, for example, working with Guild Education, basically delivering online learning, high school equivalency, college degrees, all sorts of certificates, pharmacy ops certificates, to all the way to an unimaginable number of skill certificates to be delivered to their frontline workers, the workers in the stores, the workers who have historically had no access to mobility whatsoever, and the traditional systems probably failed them. So I think one of the cooler things is that companies are really stepping up. There's a progressive wave of them, the JP Morgans, the Walmarts, the Chipotle's, the Disneys, et cetera. But I think they'll pull the rest of the gang along with them, as we keep moving forward.
One other thing I wanted to ask you is, because you have such a good vantage point on this, is the extent to which this evolution of education and education-related technology is having a globalization effect, in the sense that you're seeing these content brands begin to disseminate globally, and standards of practice and credentialing and so forth and so on. So in that pendulum swing between local versus global, what's your prediction for education? Do you think we're ultimately going to converge on a set of global understandings or standards around this is the definitive curriculum for X, this is the definitive, credentialing regime for Y, and which allows for local flavor, but has a global character? Or do you think we're still going to be using the tools for more local kind of consideration?
Yeah, I don't think about it in terms of curriculums. Obviously, there are political kind of angle. I mean, we can't even agree on state by state here in the U.S. in the K-12 curriculum. So, Lord knows we're not going to agree on it globally. But the world is flat now in ed tech, in education. Learning period, education period. I think that that's one of the more exciting things that's also happened in the sector. I mean, a decade ago, you were an American company or a Chinese company or an Indian company, and you never left your borders because of all the parochial kind of housing that education has historically had. I think aside from China, and China still, the Chinese companies, frankly, one, don't need to move outside of their borders because they can become $100 billion companies just sitting in China. So why bother? And two, I think some of the political issues have made the transfer, the idea of export and acquisition out more difficult, at least for the near term. India is actively exporting. I mean, I think India is going to totally dislocate the delivery of U.S. education. You're seeing what they can do, and Baiju, which is the largest private ed tech company in the world, 12 billion or so, did $100 million of revenue in the U.S. last year, which people didn't even realize. But what can happen with India on the export side is, you've got incredibly high quality delivery. I mean, so it's great academics delivering and great engineers delivering great quality at an extraordinarily reduced cost compared to developed nations. So I mean, we look at companies there, that are doing tutoring or something, teaching coding online. I mean, they can be paying their teachers $4 to $8 an hour, and that's a real living wage for really great teachers. And so the dynamic there with undercutting some of the challenging some of the pricing of educational product in developed countries, I think is a really positive one, because I think one of the problems historically has been a lack of access, and lack of access can often be because of cost. So I think that the global piece, I don't think in some things, John, can actually be homogenized. I mean, certainly an agreement around what it takes to be a great developer, or what it takes to be. I think there could be easily a homogenization of standards at the core, in the workforce side of things. More difficult in earlier than that, but I think, but higher ed probably qualifies too. So I think the international, and that's what makes the companies that much more. I mean, historically it was like a miracle if an education company got to $10 billion in value, and it was just like this, saddest little category in the world. And now I think we're well on our way to the first 100 billion. In the TAL and China is leading the way there, and I think Baiju will come right along with it, and many others. And so it's, I think we are going to have, and the only way these companies can have impact is to drive scale. So it's exciting that we may actually be able to begin to change the world a little bit, because companies are so have achieved efficacy and scale together.
Deborah, I could talk with you for hours, and I hope to, but I'm going to throw over to my partner, Brian, because I know he's been sitting here patiently waiting to ask you his list of, a dozen questions. So over to you, Brian.
Well, we only have a few minutes left, so I'll do my best to make them high impact. Right. Deborah, I really have enjoyed hearing your thoughts and observations. One side, we'll kind of take you out of your day-to-day role, and looking at parents and institutions that have been, generations over following a certain path, and comparing and contrasting to what Jeff over at LinkedIn had said a few years ago, that they were comparing the skills listed on LinkedIn versus the job openings, and seeing the widening gap between the two.
Yes.
Just kind of keeping it human for a second before we geek out. How do parents need to think differently when they're just so classically conditioned think about putting their kids in university and getting the degree and getting the best job after that?
Yeah, I think we're actually seeing parents begin to think differently. I mean, again, I think that parent is only 30% of our parents, right? So right today, and I think through alternative paths, we can take a big whack at the other 70% by not having the traditional path. So I actually think, I think the pandemic. I mean, you can actually look at some of the numbers. I mean, Gen Z, which is the class, is, I think he's giving much bigger consideration to not doing, to skipping college. I guess, the counter to that would be Harvard having 40% more applicants than they've ever had in history. But that was obviously the removal of the test, and that's not going to move the needle in terms of who actually goes there. So I actually am quite optimistic that people are beginning to think differently. I mean, there was a poll done by Kaplan actually last year, which actually had a group of millennials or Gen Z, young people, young adults, pick between a Google credential and Harvard, and the vast majority picked Google. And so I think those kinds of indicators leave you with a lot of optimism. And then if schools can begin to, in the K-12 system, if we can begin to get more coding, more STEM, STEM, and make it fun and engaging. I think we're also seeing. I mean, listen, Roblox is the largest. I mean, arguably the largest ed tech company ever created. That's not the way they frame themselves, of course, but what people are learning on Roblox is just extraordinary. It's fantastic. So I think we're beginning to see. Chinks in the armor, and I think there's nothing but upside in that.
Yeah, that's a wonderful response, and I guess I'll throw another question just to kind of keep it at a more human level. Is I've done a lot of work like John in innovation, and a lot of times the biggest appetite for that is in traditional corporates or organizations that need to feed on the best talent in order to stay relevant and to grow. But at the same time, you have a dated human resources infrastructure, systems, application process, training programs that are woefully outdated, but all have that shared aspiration and hunger for bringing on the best talent. So what do they need to hear about how they can change much more quickly in this environment in order to attract that talent?
Yeah, what's interesting, I mean, when you look at polling, I mean, in the millennial Gen Z sort of early worker, actually, learning is very high in terms of ranking benefits that they're looking for, and so I think that's symptomatic of a move forward. I think that we're seeing corporation. I mean, I think corporate learning has. We all know what that's been like. For those of us who've been through it. Corporates have to turn to more dynamic, more flexible. I mean, I think one of the positive things too is you've got all these consumer options. So what you're seeing a lot of is consumer workers are buying product, bringing it into the workforce. And Pluralsight was really built on this, right? I mean, individuals were buying Pluralsight licenses to make their developer skills, improve their developer skills. They ported it into the enterprise, and then the enterprise recognized that 60% of their engineers were using various products from Pluralsight, and so then they upgraded their offerings to what was at the time more modern and more relevant skill building. So I think that I think there's an empowerment of the individual to realize that they've got to agency is sort of the big word, have their own agency around their own life mobility, career mobility, economic mobility, and part of that's got to be an embrace of learning new things. And companies, I am optimistic that companies are getting the joke increasingly. I mean, we're not advertisement, but even things like we're an investor in a young company founded by two amazing women called Athena, and Athena's started with anti-harassment training. And I mean, I could send you guys. I mean, it is the funnest training you have. I mean, it's short, it's clever, it's smart, it makes you think, and so it's. I mean, not a coincidence that Netflix was their first customer, followed by Zoom, followed by. I mean, so they've had this incredible resonance in modern corporations because they've broken all the the walls down around what the traditional delivery of learning, and figured out how to engage the employee who's actually doing the learning around a really important topic, right? And now they're doing money laundering. I told them I can't wait to see how they make money laundering funny. But it's, so I think we're seeing this whole new generation of and people thinking about learning science. I mean, John probably knows this better than anybody. John was one of the only professors at Harvard Business School that I liked. That was not the highlight of my academic experience. It's learning science is really real. I mean, we know how people learn well, right? I mean, spaced repetition and fun quizzing and so we know how people learn well, and we just have to apply it in fun and engaging ways that have people within corporations continue to move up and not get not become one of the obsolescent ones left behind. So I'm pretty optimistic in a way. I've been doing ed tech for 25 years. So we like to say way before it was sexy. So it's a pretty optimistic moment around just sort of delivery of highly efficacious, highly engaging, highly modern solutions, to really serious problems of people staying economically relevant in a rapidly moving economy. So.
I'm gonna add just real quick because we're out of time. But if I could squeeze one more in, what you just said is so important. It's not just about the young talent, right? It's about the existing talent that we can reskill. That
Absolutely.
if we free up some of their repetition or some of their role as in responsibility with automation and AI, RPA. What should HR and leadership think about in terms of not reskilling? To me, just
I know.
It's the worst word.
It's the buzzword. I know. Make up a new word. I'm dying for somebody to come up with a new word.
All right. Well, challenge accepted. In the meantime, how do we get people to be more creative and create essentially an employee renaissance for this new age of working?
Well, a great question. And I think part of the question is it in HR or is it actually in the working business unit? Because this reskilling, upskilling, reskilling, I know, I just hate it, but is very much about making economic delivery of business units optimized, right? So, and so I think some of the revolution needs to happen in at the unit level, and we're seeing that with a lot of companies where they're actually making their sales at the GM or whatever level, so that they can and then probably approved by the L&D team and things like that. So I think that there needs to be an elevation, and I think there actually has been a bit of an elevation of the L&D team. It was not a function that was properly prioritized historically. We actually in COVID, I think interestingly, every recession we've ever had, the first thing people cut was L&D, right? And we didn't see that this time. We did not see any. In fact, we saw in many cases an increase. Unless you were an airline and you'd laid off all your people, so you just weren't going to buy as many seats, right? So I think there is a positive sign in its prominence in the corporate agenda is much higher than it ever has been, which is appropriate, and then that will also attract highly talented people to want to do it and deliver it and think out of the box. And so it's a pretty virtuous circle, frankly. If you deprioritize something, it deprioritizes. So I think people have to be open to it's hard to. We have one company that's really going, actually I saw one of the messages about it, really trying to go at this issue of how do you free up enough time? How does a corporation free up enough time for an individual to be able to adequately spend time on learning to improve their to change their trajectory? And I think that's a big, I think that is a big question, because we all only have finite time. And so again, I think it's got to be employee agency, asking for it, needing it. And then I think you need some real progressive corporate leadership, and I think we've got it. I mean, we've got a lot of great leadership, pounding the table that this just has to happen. And I think importantly, I mean, often we've talked about L&D too. It's sort of the mid-manager and up. I think the incredible thing is that we're getting commitments to upskill frontline workers, who historically had never gotten any attention from the enterprise around improving their career mobility.
Oh, well said. Well said. Pounding the table. I love it. I love it. So, John, before I turn it over to you, say goodbye. Just Deborah, I'm going to share with you just a couple of comments that are sending you props for your decor. John, over to you.
Well, Deborah, as said earlier, it's great to see you, and we're going to be following your trajectory, which seems to marry so well with the trajectory of the future of education. So thank you so much for being here. I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. It's fun.
Be well.
All right. So it's us back here on an Echo.
We're working on.
You don't show the intermediate.
This is us at John's kitchen counter. As you can see, we're actually in the same room together, and we have learned a lot of what it takes to put on a live show together. And it's also going to be the case probably later in 2021, where we use this as a live studio, as a salon, where we'll be broadcasting sort of like a real world Clubhouse across the world, across all of these platforms, and probably Clubhouse as well. So thank you very much. We've gone through some technical difficulties. We're learning from this. In the meantime, please do make sure to subscribe to our newsletter. Do follow John and myself across all these platforms, including Clubhouse. You'll be seeing intersections on Clubhouse very soon. John's going to be actually setting up that club here shortly. All past episodes are at intersectionslive.com. We'll be updating all of the posts to go a little bit deeper into what the conversations cover, but you can watch every episode, whether it's YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Periscope, live, and then also archived. And with that said, John, I think I'll just turn it over to you, say a few parting words, and we'll say goodbye until next week.
Well, as I said earlier, the pre-production and every aspect of the show that has occurred since has been done virtually. Brian and I actually haven't seen each other face to face since before we started talking about this show. So today is a great reminder. It's kind of like the reemergence in a way. It's a symptom of the reemergence that we are able to be here, immunized, maskless, small groups, CDC compliant, but actually working together to set up this ad hoc studio to have, I think, really intriguing interviews with people each one of us has shared a history with, and to be able to kind of unfold the topics they're in. It speaks to the power of a physical place. So I think leveraging the studio, as Brian said, for salons and for analog clubhouses is definitely on the agenda. So thank you very much for being with us today, and we'll see you next week.